everyone, hope you're well. Today we're going to chat a bit about having boundaries in your business. So I think this is something that's so important when it comes to like our self-care for our own business as well, because when we don't have boundaries, that's really going to impact how we feel, our well-being and things like that. I'm just going to rub off like all the mascara marks off my eyes now. It's quite hot here. I've just got the little one is fast asleep in here, so I thought I would do some multitasking while she's asleep and chat about that. So when it comes to boundaries, there's a couple of different ways that I tend to think of them. I think of the boundaries that we have like with ourselves and the boundaries that we have with our clients and things as well. The first thing I want to say is it's not if a client is pushing on our boundaries, that's not necessarily the client's fault. It's usually our fault because we haven't communicated clearly those boundaries. If we have and they're still pushing the boundaries, then that's when we need to be referring back to some kind of communication that we've had with them, which is what we're going to look at in a couple of minutes. But it's so important to have some of these boundaries in place, and there's like I said, there's different ways to set them in place and to communicate those, which we'll look at in a minute. But what I've tended to find in my business is that I've become more boundaried the further on that I've come. And I think when you first start off, I think there's this tendency, there certainly was for me, where you're kind of so desperate just to have some clients, just to get some work, that, you know, you've got no boundaries. You'll see people whenever, you know, they want to be seen. You won't charge very much. You know, you'll let them email you all the time, or, you know, there's just no boundaries there whatsoever. And often that can lead to you feeling a bit burnt out. It can lead to you feeling a bit resentful almost. And it's just not a very good place to be. And also it really affects your ability to make a decent amount of money as well. So I'll come on to that in a second as well. So boundaries are so important. It's not just your experience in your business that it's going to impact, but it can be, you know, the how you make money in your business as well can be really impacted if you don't have those boundaries in place. So when it comes to having boundaries with clients, I think the key thing is around how are you managing expectations for your clients. You know, what are they expecting of you and what are you expecting of them? And I think that's a really good place to start when it comes to thinking about clients. So again, this is something that's been so progressive for me. I think the first thing that I put in place around boundaries was around when I was going to work and when I wasn't, and the kind of work that I was going to do. And as I say, as my business has developed, I've become a lot more boundary basically around that. And certainly as I've had Freya, and I haven't got a lot of time and we're in lockdown, I've had to become even more boundaried. And the thing I want to say as well about boundaries is that sometimes when we're putting them in place for the first time, it can feel really uncomfortable. It can just feel really like icky, and like we don't want to be like, sometimes we can feel like a bitch. Like that's probably the thing that's come to me. Sometimes you can feel like a bit of a bitch for putting them in place. And I mean, I've had to and again, if any of my clients are watching this and they think I'm talking about them, A, I'm probably not, but B, it's not the client's fault. But I've had to put some boundaries in place recently, and it felt very uncomfortable having to do that, but I knew that I had to do it. So really it's about how we're going to manage those expectations between like the relationship between us and our clients. I think that's the first thing to think about when it comes to boundaries. So for me, it's things like occasionally I'll end up switching mobile numbers with a client, but I want to be very clear that they're not to messages on my, because that's my personal mobile, not to messages on that, not to use WhatsApp message. I mean, the latest thing that happened recently was someone messaged me on WhatsApp when I was out having a walk with the family, and I know exactly where she was having a panic, and that was totally fine, but I had never put the boundary in place and said, like, do not use this form of communication with me, please. And I had to kind of apply and say, you know, in future, can you just contact us via email? So that was a boundary thing there. So it can be things like the time that you're available to respond. So another thing with boundaries when it comes to your clients is, you know, when are you available? If your package isn't just one-to-one calls, if it's things like email, if it's let's say you've got an online program, if it's things like responding in a Facebook group, it can be really helpful to lay out what the expectations are for you. So you might have a rule that you don't want to work on weekends and that you're not going to be available in Facebook groups or on email at weekends. And, you know, it's really useful to have that written down somewhere to communicate that. And again, there's no right or wrong here. As long as you're communicating what your boundaries are, your boundaries can be whatever you want them to be. You know, as long as people are aware of that when they start working with you, I think that's the key thing. So really, when it comes to working with clients, it's about managing expectations. And then I think you've got the boundaries that you have with yourself as well. So when you're thinking about your boundaries that you're going to have for you and your business, it can be things like, how do I want to kind of show up in my business? And obviously I've talked quite a lot about how we're going to show up. Last month I launched my Show Up and Serve program, which has been great so far. I've really enjoyed working with the women in that group, and we've talked a lot about how we want to show up in our businesses in this particular time. And it can be thinking about, well, how do I want to show up, and what are my boundaries going to be around that? And I've had to, because usually a boundary for me wouldn't be I would not work on weekends. I would not. I probably wouldn't necessarily be doing this kind of thing when I've got the kids. However, the situation has changed and my boundaries have changed around that. And now I see clients and have calls on Saturdays because that's when I've got some childcare. And I do a bit of work during the week when I've got the kids because that's the way things are at the moment, and that's okay. So boundaries are going to shift and change, and that's another thing that we're going to look at in a sec. So it's thinking about things like that. When might you want to work? What are you going to charge? This is another bit of an epiphany that I had lately, was in the kind of work, and again, this might not be applicable to everyone, but it depends on kind of how you tend to work. Is that I would sometimes do like small kind of tech jobs for clients who have had websites done by me. And that's something I've recently decided I'm not going to do anymore, because it's not my zone of genius. It's not the work that I enjoy doing. Love the website design, love the branding design, love getting people set up and getting them on the way. But the ongoing tech support is not my zone of genius whatsoever. It's not something I want to do. And I certainly don't charge enough for it. And I had that epiphany where I was like, I should not be, why am I doing this work? And also that has a massive knock-on effect on how much income I make in my business, because if I'm fiddling on with little tasks for £30, like that's taking time away from when I could be making a lot more money or doing a much bigger project, or actually having time to myself and actually really investing in my own self-care as well. So you might want to think about what boundaries do you have around your pricing? Like, is there a price where you're not gonna, like a boundary around what you'll charge? Because I think that's really, really important. And actually, if you don't kind of think that through, again, depending on what your business looks like, mine's probably a little bit different from some of yours, because I do some of these kind of more hands-on, done for you type packages in the work that I do. But what would be like a minimum price? And I kind of laugh. It's like, what was it Naomi Campbell said, like, I don't get out of bed for like less than 10 grand or something like something ridiculous like that. But you might even have like a little boundary for yourself. Like, I don't work for less than a certain amount of money, and that's totally fine. Like, you're allowed to do that. Like, you're absolutely allowed to do that. So you might have a boundary around that. So like I say, you could have boundaries around when you're going to work, around what you're going to charge, around how people can communicate with you, about the ways that you work, all sorts of different areas like that. And again, I think what tends to happen is, and I'm going to give you some really, really good tips in a second about how you can start this as your business begins. But what I would say is, I think boundaries need to be reviewed quite frequently, because what you'll start to notice is like, oh, that like someone's just done that and that doesn't feel good to me, and that's not how I want to run my business, and that becomes a new boundary that you want to put in place. So it's really worth reviewing your boundaries quite often. But when it comes to them, like I said, the most important thing I think with boundaries is communicating them to people. So there's a couple of different ways that I tend to do that, and that I found is really, really useful. The first thing is having an email autoresponder. So if any of you guys have ever emailed me, you probably will have seen that you get an automatic email that comes back, and it usually says like when you can expect to hear from me, and sometimes it even says you might not hear from me at all. So because I used to do a lot of blogging, I sometimes get emails, well I actually get quite a lot of emails from like PR people and random guest posts and a lot of spammy stuff, and I used to feel like I had to answer everything because I'm a nice person and I don't want to be a bitch. I used to feel like I had to answer everything. But when I decided to put that email autoresponder there, that was really setting out my expectations. So with people, it was saying, right, these are my working hours. This is when you might expect to hear back from me. This is when you're not going to hear back from me. Sorry, because this is not work that I do anymore. you know, this is where you can find some quick answers to things if this is what you're looking for. And that felt really, really good to have that in place. That was have that email autoresponder. So that's something I would say to everyone could do that really easily. Most email systems, you can set up an autoresponder and set that up on your email and have that and you can also have it as like, if you have a contact form on your website, you can have that come up as like an automatic message when people hit submit to the message. And that'll tell people, like, this is when you can expect to hear from me. It might not be in the next 24 hours. It might be more like 48, or longer hours before you're going to hear back from me. That's totally fine. You're setting that expectation. There can be, these are my working hours. You're not going to hear from us at 10 o'clock at night, just so you know. All these kind of things can be really helpful. So that's the first tip, is create an email autoresponder. The second one is in addition, most of us should definitely have some kind of contract or program agreement with our clients. But what I've found is really, really helpful is to have an additional sheet, which I call like my working with me sheet. And basically it lays out in kind of more more easy to read language than a contract or a program agreement. Like, this is how I work. And these are the expectations that we have. So mine basically says that these are my working hours. This is how... Sorry, there's a bee coming in the house. I knew it was going to come in when I did this. Sorry, it's gone outside. I'm just letting my little boy know it's gone outside, sweetheart. Oh, there was another one. Oh, I think apparently all the honeybees are swarming at the moment. Hello, I'm just doing my live video. I don't know if anyone's watching live, but if you've got any comments or anything, do let me know on boundaries. I do have boundaries with honeybees and bumblebees. I don't want to kill them, but I don't want them in the house. But apparently honeybees are swarming at the moment. I read an article. That's why there's a lot of them around and about. So anyway, I was talking about boundaries. So yeah, so working with me sheet, and I have, these are my working hours. This is how we're going to contact each other. Do not contact us on social media because I get overwhelmed with those kind of messages. Just contact us on email. These are that kind of things really, really useful. Things like, I also have, because certainly for when I do website and brand design, I have like a very specific way that I work. So I've got really specific guidelines and boundaries around that I lay out. I also have a bit about flexibility because, again, this is something that you might have covered in a program agreement. But sorry, there's another bee trying to get in. I know, it's all right, it'll find its way out. I'm going to walk around that, guys. It'll find its way out, look. There it goes. Close that door. This is just real life. I'm afraid. I wish I could be one of those women who have really professional Facebook lives. But this is definitely my lockdown reality at the minute. Just leave the door open because the bee will come out. It's because it's such a beautiful day as well. The bee's gone out. Oh, okay. So yes, so having a working with me sheet, and that can just be just a quick PDF that you have alongside your program agreement, and that can work super well. Another thing that you can have, and it's kind of similar to that, is if you have like an online course or some kind of online program, you can have a similar kind of sheet around a similar kind of bit of information about expectations. I've got that as part of Show Up and Serve. So again, I say this is when you can expect to hear back from me. You only get, it's all right then, just come in. You only get email support if you are at a certain level. Otherwise, it's about messaging me in the Facebook group. This is when you can expect to hear back from me inside in the Facebook group. And I usually respond a lot quicker than the actual time that I put on the expectation sheet. But it's helpful for me to know that I don't have to panic if I'm not responding to people immediately. And that's really what it's about when it comes to boundaries, and certainly around supporting your self-care and your business as well. Another thing that you might want to have in place is some kind of terms and conditions for the way that you work. So this is something you might have in your program agreement, but if you don't, you want to have this really crystal clear, is what is your approach to refunds. And again, I made a decision recently that I don't do refunds. It's just not something I want to do in my business. That they are an absolute nightmare to process and to deal with. I had a really difficult situation a while back with someone around a refund request, and it's so much easier either you completely do refunds, just do them, and that's fine. Or, this is my view, either just, if you're going to give refunds, just give them, or you're going to have like a blanket thing where you just don't. And now my thing now is that I just don't do refunds. If someone's unhappy, then I would probably obviously have that discussion with them, and if they were really unhappy, I probably would give them a refund if they felt I hadn't lived up to my side of the value that they wanted to get out of a program. But it's that's just a boundary that I want to have in my business. It's not right or wrong. It's just that's what I want for my business. I don't want to have to be spending a lot of time processing those things. That's not the way that I want to run things. And I think if you make that really clear at the start, I'm all about making sure people are really happy and working with us, and I work really hard on that. So luckily I don't get a lot of refund requests at all, but sometimes people's financial situations will change, and I've just got to have that boundary in place. What I often do is try and serve them as best as I can and make sure they get value out of that. So I had someone who requested a refund recently, and I said, no, but how about we change what it is that you've actually paid for, and you have something else that might be a different kind of value that might be a bit better for you. And that worked really, really well for her, and she was over the moon. So that's another thing that you might want to have is, how are you going to deal with refunds and things like that, because that's a bit of a boundary that can sometimes come up. Another thing that you can have as well, I'm just checking my notes because I always forget these things. So we've talked about, just to recap, we've talked about having an email autoresponder, we've talked about having a working with me sheet or an expectations kind of guidance that you might have with an online program or a course or a membership. We've talked about having some kind of guidance around refunds, around how you're going to manage that financial side of things for people. Also, the other thing that you might want to have is some kind of online scheduler. So I know that we had a comment in the Facebook group, and I think it was Joanne, 2 seconds, I'm just going to check who it was. But I know I had a comment in the Facebook group just saying that she knew the kind of hours that she wanted to work, but when a client would respond that they couldn't do that, she would automatically kind of change when she would be available. And what I did ask her was, does she use an online scheduler? Because what I tend to find is I use Calendly, and what I tend to find is Bobby. So Bobby mentioned that she's got the idea, like the times that she wants to work, but that people tend to come back and say they can't do it, and she just kind of says, well, I'll see you whenever. I tend to find if I use an online scheduler, that doesn't happen as much, because I think people kind of say, well, this is when I'm available, and not very often they come back and say they can't do it. What I am doing at the moment, though, because of lockdown and because my availability is really squeezed, is I am saying if it's completely impossible for you to do like the literal only day that I'm available at the moment, then I'm happy to try and work out and figure out another time for you. But I find that having an online scheduler is a really, really good thing for boundaries. Like if you've got a specific times and days that you want to work, having an online scheduler, I think you're more likely to have people stick with the times that you're available if you use that. Okay, sweetheart. We're doing some window drawing now. So I think that can be really useful as well as using something like that. If that doesn't work, and just to reply to what Bobby was saying, if she does use that and it still doesn't work, I think it is tricky, because I think at the start of your business especially, and I don't know if Bobby's right at the very start or not, but I think at the start you kind of just want to get the clients in. But the difficulty is if you're doing work when it's not the best time for you, you're gonna not. What I tended to find was I wasn't bringing my best self to the equation. Like working on an evening, that's not my best time to work at all. I did it when I was still working full time, but that was not my best time to be working, was on an evening whatsoever. And I found that really difficult, and that was one of the first boundaries that I brought in, was that I wasn't going to work on an evening if I could possibly help it, because it's not the best time for me to be working. So that was really helpful. And then just going to check what the last thing I wanted to mention was. So the final thing was like I kind of said before, was making sure that you're reviewing your boundaries, because they're going to change as you go through your business, and you're going to learn kind of what fits well with you and what doesn't. You're going to kind of figure out, like, this feels good, this doesn't feel good, this is letting me live my life the way that I want to live it, and this isn't. This is working well with for my clients, and this isn't, and you're going to start to kind of discover things. But I think just to go back to those main things that okay, sweetheart, well, I'll help you in a sec. It goes back to those kind of main things that I want people to focus on, which are having some kind of email autoresponder, I think is really useful, having a working with me sheet or some kind of like expectations kind of worksheet that goes along with a program agreement. I think it's also having something in writing and very like some terms and conditions around refunds and things, especially if you're doing online courses and programs. I think that's where it can get a bit more tricky. And also, what was the other thing that I had at the end? Using an online calendar system if you can as well. And a lot of them, like I use Calendly, I'm sure that they have a free level, but I use the paid one because it is really, really useful as well. So hopefully those tips have helped you. Sorry, it's been a bit of a manic life with the little one and bees coming in the house and everything like that. But hopefully that hasn't distracted too much from what I was trying to share. And like I said, I think the main thing to remember as well is that there's no right or wrong when it comes to boundaries. This is really about you doing business the way that you want to do it and protecting your well-being as well, because I think if you don't have boundaries in your business, your well-being's going to take a hit, and also your bottom line's going to take a hit, because again, like if you're doing work that isn't valuable to you and you're not charging the prices that you should be charging, that's going to have a really big impact on how much money you're going to make in the long run as well. So yes, so hopefully that gives you lots of ideas. Oh, that's lovely. My little boy's drawing some lovely pictures on the window. So I hope you guys are well anyway. I hope that that's made some sense. And do let me know in the comments if you've got any questions around boundaries. If anything's unsure, let me know. But like I say, I think those things are really good places to start and just review and just see how things feel as your business develops and grows. But I hope you're all well, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.